Good morning, friends. I am here. Oh, it's like exactly 10 a.m. So I am waiting for a few arrivals before we get started. Uh, People are coming anytime, I am sure. I got to be straight with you. Oh, hi, Pam. Um, Raise your hand if you're tired of this. I'm sick of this, man. It's it's hard to keep your spirits up day after day. So I'm feeling in a little bit of a funk today. I don't mind telling you. Among other things. I mean, it's all stupid stuff. It's all silly stuff. I know I'm fine, but I'm just tired of this. I'm just tired of it. And I'm not liking the fact that I just don't like this lipstick with this outfit now. Normally I don't look at myself in a camera on a regular day, so I don't know. And I can't go get a different lipstick, so this is the way it is. Anywhere, yeah, really small problems compared to what people are dealing with. But sometimes that's just the way we are, isn't it? Well, anyway, it is Friday, so this is our last reading until next week. And I did want to I tell you, some of you are probably going to be spending the weekend, have time on your hands. If you would like to make masks to help with the COVID-19 crisis, and if, and check with your local authorities to see if they need it. Please don't send me emails saying, no, these are terrible. Some hospitals want them, some don't. So check with your local authorities to see if these are needed in your area. And if they are, you'll see my digital resource this week from my friend Jackie Kunkel at cvquiltworks.com. She's got a really great video tutorial and patterns for masks. So if you're wondering how to make those, that would be a great resource to check out this weekend. Cannot really think of a better way to take our mind off our troubles than sewing. That's my personal feeling. And you know what? And if we can sew and put our extra fabric to work for a very good and needed cause, then that's great. But again, check with your local people to make sure the masks are needed and wanted. Most areas are needing them right now. I'm going to be doing some this weekend myself. Okay, let's get to the book, shall we? We really left things in a tough place yesterday, so I'm hoping we end on a happier note for the weekend, shall we? All right, we're in a single thread. This is chapters 12 and 13 we're going to be reading today. All right, here we go. Chapter 12, Abigail Burgess Wynne. While I was getting dressed that morning, I dropped the cameo brooch, the one Wooly bought for me in London. The fall chipped it. I knew it was not going to be a good day. Of course, I didn't need a jewelry omen to tell me that. There was nothing about the idea of spending the afternoon sewing a quilt that appealed to me, especially sewing a quilt while Liza sat next to me glaring recriminations. But there was no way to avoid it, so I finished getting dressed and walked across the green, slowly, to meet Liza. I was late, though not nearly as late as Liza claimed when she blurted out this information to two strangers. The girl dramatizes everything. Thinking that correcting her would only make things worse, I decided to ignore her, focus completely on the task at hand, and get through the ordeal without becoming engaged in some sort of emotional scene. But at the end of the day, it was unavoidable. Though the drama erupted from an unexpected source, not my angry, bitter niece, but the owner of the quilt shop, Evelyn Dixon. When Evelyn entered the storeroom where Liza, Margot Matthews, and I were seated, I was surprised by her appearance. Her newspaper photograph had made her appear so elegant and well put together, but today her clothes looked careless and rumpled, almost as if she'd slept in them. Perhaps someone else had supervised her wardrobe selection for the newspaper picture, I thought. In any case, I was glad to see her. My goal was to make the quilt block as quickly as possible, fulfilling my promise to Liza, and leave cobbled cord quilts never to return. But I was getting frustrated trying to understand the instruction sheet and that frowsy woman with the horrible Rhinestone glasses had handed out, along with the kids. And Liza and Margot were just as confused as I was. In spite of Liza's rude and embarrassing outburst, once Evelyn started showing us what to do, there was a definite easing of tension. And I began, if not to enjoy myself, at least to become more interested in what I was doing. In school, I'd enjoyed geometry, and as Evelyn explained the basic construction of a quilt and quilt blocks, I saw that the whole thing is based on geometric theories. After a time, I was so concentrated on my task and trying to make sure that all my angles and points were cut and sewn properly so as to make a perfect square, I forgot why I was there in the first place. It was a pleasant distraction from the tensions of the day. Time passed quickly, and while focusing on the quilt block, it was easy to avoid making eye contact with Liza. By the time Evelyn began to demonstrate the applique technique, I'd started to think that the day might not turn out as badly as I'd feared, and that, at least in terms of blackmail payments, I'd gotten off fairly cheaply after all. All it cost me was half a day spent sewing a quilt block that was actually turning out rather nicely and allowing Liza to repaint the walls of her bedroom, not black, but in shades of blue, gray, and green, with a technique that made the walls look like Italian marble. It wasn't a look I'd have chosen for myself, but she made a good job of it. If I'd paid a decorator to do it, I'm sure it would have cost a fortune. All in all, I said to myself, this is a small price to pay to preserve your niece's neck in its current pristine state, free of a family monogram. But I spoke too soon. Without warning, Evelyn Dixon's calm veneer cracked. She pricked her needle with the finger. She pricked her finger with a needle, producing a few drops of blood, a veil of tears, and the shocking revelation that she had been diagnosed with breast cancer on the day before she was hosting a fundraiser to fight the same disease. Naturally, I felt bad for her. Who wouldn't? However, it really was her personal business, not mine. Though the irony of the situation was not lost on me, any more than I'd missed the fact that her sobbed confession occurred in front of my eyes and my niece's on the same day my own sister succumbed to her fight with cancer. Clearly, the world was full of ironies. Either that or God has a cruel sense of humor. Or was there something else to all of this? I didn't have time to wonder further. The next thing I knew, Margot Matthews had taken charge and was ordering me about. Was there to be no end of the humiliations of this day? Abigail, run get a glass of water, would you please? Better yet, make some tea, she commanded. Evelyn, do you have a teapot or a microwave around here somewhere? Tears streamed through Evelyn's closed eyelids. Upstairs in my apartment. She sniffed loudly, making a sound I'd rather not describe. You live upstairs? Even better. Let's just take you home. As if she were an invalid, Margot placed her forearm under Evelyn's elbow and helped her to her feet, supporting her as she walked wearily toward the stairs. Liza, would you turn off the lights and make sure that the closed sign is out on the door? I stood there for a moment, uncertain of what I should do. I didn't know Evelyn Dixon. None of us did. Did Margot expect me to follow her upstairs into Evelyn's home and actually make tea for her? Liza, having completed her assignment, hurried for the stairs, brushing past without looking at me, not even bothering to give me her customary glare. It felt silly, standing alone in the now darkened shop, so I followed the others. Upstairs, in the small, neatly arranged apartment, Evelyn reclined on a narrow green sofa. Liza was tucking a quilt around her legs, and though her eyes were red, she was actually smiling. In the time she'd been living with me, I'd rarely seen Liza smile. She was really quite pretty when she did. Margot emerged from another room carrying a box of tissues and handed some to Evelyn. I went into the kitchen, a galley affair separated from the living and dining area by a counter and stools, and started boiling water for tea. It felt odd, rooting around in some stranger's cupboards and drawers, but I found the cabinet where Evelyn kept her tea bags and sugar. There were some crackers as well. It occurred to me that what with her shop being overrun with customers and the distress of her diagnosis, Evelyn might not have eaten. Clearly, she had bigger problems than an empty stomach, but hunger and fatigue certainly didn't help the situation. I'm not much of a cook, but anyone can slice cheese. I found a block of cheddar and some grapes in the refrigerator and arranged them on a platter with the crackers. Here we are, I said cheerily as I carried a tray with food and 4 steaming cups of tea into the living room. I couldn't find any lemon, but there's milk and sugar for the tea and a few things to munch on. Evelyn, may I fix you a plate? No, thank you. I'm not hungry. Her eyes were dry now, but still rimmed in red, and I thought it wouldn't take much to bring on a fresh wave of weeping. Why don't you just have a little something, Margot urged, without waiting for an answer, put some cheese and crackers onto a plate and handed it to Evelyn. I bet you haven't eaten all day, have you? Evelyn shook her head. On top of that, you're probably exhausted. You can't think clearly on no sleep and an empty stomach. You've got to come up with some sort of plan about how you're going to live your life and manage your business while you beat this thing. And we're going to help you. We were? Margot was awfully free with her use of personal pronouns. Certainly, I admired her capability, her calm reaction in a difficult circumstance. In fact, I couldn't help but wonder why any company would have let her go and why someone else hadn't snapped her up. But she was going a little overboard. I've nothing against being a good Samaritan. My involvement in local charity was certainly a testament to that. But hadn't we all done our good deed for the day? After all, until this afternoon, none of us had laid eyes on Evelyn Dixon. Evelyn swallowed the bite of the cracker she'd been dutifully chewing. You are? But you barely know me. You've never met me before today. My point exactly. What difference does that make? God put us on earth to help one another, didn't he? Oh, no, she was one of those. A moderate amount of religious feeling never hurt anyone, but people who wear their faith on their sleeves are off-putting. Margot, I decided, was one of those people. Suddenly, her long stretch of unemployment made sense. Perhaps her religiosity made coworkers uncomfortable. Spying the silver crucifix she was wearing around her neck, I was certain that is what had happened. Margot smiled brightly and looked around at the rest of us as if waiting for an actual answer to what I felt was a rhetorical question. Liza shot me a look, not her usual evil glare, but a pointed gaze that elicited a sudden rush of heat to my face, and said, absolutely, no one should have to go through this alone. I shifted my eyes away from Liza's. Yes, of course, I said, anything I can do to help. Margot turned back to Evelyn. You see, there's the three of us coming into the shop so late and sitting together, getting hidden away in the back room so you'd find us after everyone else was gone. None of that was a coincidence. I've got a feeling we were all handpicked to be here today. You might feel like you're alone in this, Evelyn, but it isn't true. God knows you need some friends to help you through this. Well, here we are. You'll see, we're all in this together. And as suddenly as Margot the cheerleader made this pronouncement, we all were in it, whether we wanted to be or not. Margot pulled a notepad out of her purse and started conducting a series of probing, fact-finding interviews. First, she began quizzing Evelyn, asking her about her conversation with the doctor and what she knew about the details of her diagnosis, which wasn't much. Apparently, the poor thing had lapsed into something of a state of shock upon hearing the news and either didn't hear or didn't comprehend much of what her doctor had said after giving her the bad news. Then Margot began asking questions about the quilt shop, some of them rather personal, relating to the financial stability of the business, which seemed tenuous, but more about the day-to-day running of the store and any kinds of special projects that might be coming up in the immediate future. Finally, she asked Evelyn about her family and any friends she had in New Bern. There wasn't much on either count. She'd moved from Texas after an unpleasant divorce, so there was no husband on the scene. Her only son lived in Seattle, too far away to be much help. Having recently arrived in New Bern, she had a number of acquaintances, customers mostly, like the women who would volunteer to help her with the Quilt Pink Day, but didn't seem to have many friends. However, she did seem to have a fairly close relationship with Charlie Donnelly, and that surprised me. I adore Charlie. He has an almost famously gruff manner that some people find intimidating, but I rather enjoy. Over time, I discovered that his rough exterior hid a personality of rare charm and a quick wit that was well worth the effort it took to unearth them. Still, even after all these years, I couldn't say that we were close. As far as I knew, he had very few close friends. Interesting that he and Evelyn had hit it off so quickly. Next, Margot turned her investigatory skills on the rest of us, quizzing first Liza and then me about our interests, experiences, and contacts before filling us in on her own background in business, specifically in marketing and public relations, which was considerable. It was all very interesting, this whole getting to know you session, but I was having a hard time seeing where it would lead. Besides, it was already 8 o'clock. Florence Pearl was hosting a surprise birthday party for her husband, Stephen. Truthfully, I don't like Stephen, who owns an insurance agency and is forever bothering me about adequate coverage. But Florence was nice enough, and I'd promised her I'd drop by. I considered saying something about being late for a party, but when I looked across the room at Liza, who was sitting on a plum-colored ottoman with her body turned toward Margot, but her eyes continually stealing back to Evelyn, I kept silent. The party would go on for a couple of hours yet. I would just have to be late, which wasn't such a terrible prospect. With any luck, I thought, I'll be in and out in 30 minutes, fulfilling my social obligations without being subjected to any conversation with Stephen beyond happy birthday. So that's about it for me, Margot said. I'd been lost in my own thoughts and missed the last part of what she'd been saying. Evelyn, I think we've got a pretty good idea of what you need, at least for the next few days. Margot chewed on the end of her pen as she scanned the notes she'd taken. The way I see it, your biggest priority right now is trying to understand exactly what you're up against, what your diagnosis means, and what your best treatment options are. Evelyn, who was now much calmer, nodded. Yes, that's right. Dr. Thayer's a good doctor. I'm sure he tried to explain all that to me, but I was too stunned to take any of it in. That's all right, Liza said quietly, reaching out to pat the quilt that covered Evelyn's legs. It's a perfectly normal reaction. She hesitated for a moment, and her eyes darted away from Evelyn's. At least, I suppose it is. And anyway, Margot continued practically, even though Dr. Thayer is a good doctor, you're going to need a specialist, probably more than one. It's always good to have a second opinion, and that's where Abigail comes in. I'd been sipping the last dregs of lukewarm tea from my cup when Margot said my name. I choked on it. I will, I sputtered. How? I don't know anything about breast cancer. No, but you know the people who do know, or at least you know the people who know the people who do. I looked at Margot blankly. She smiled. Abigail, you're on the library and the hospital boards, right? I nodded. Tomorrow, I'd like you to go to the library and ask the librarians to help you find out all the latest information on breast cancer, causes, treatment options, clinical trials, anything you can find. Then, I'd like you to call up the hospital administrator and the head of oncology and ask them for the names of the 3 best breast cancer specialists in the area, not just at the New Bern Hospital or even in the state, but the 3 best in New England. Ask them to get appointments for Evelyn as soon as possible, by the end of next week at the latest. At this, Evelyn sat up a little straighter, brightening visibly. Can you really do that? Well, of course I can, I said, a little insulted by the question. Ted Nichols is the administrator at New Bern Memorial. We've known each other for years, and the Wynn Foundation just purchased a new CAT scan for the hospital. Of course Ted will help us. If he doesn't, I'd certainly like to know the reason why. That's the spirit, Margot cheered. But, Evelyn said, doubt overshadowing the expression of hope that had so briefly crossed her face, how am I supposed to pay for some famous specialist? I've got insurance, but not much. With all the expense of opening the shop, I got the cheapest policy I could manage with a huge deductible. And I'm sure they won't cover my visits to any out-of-state doctors. We're not going to think about that right now, Margot said. At the moment, our job is to help you understand what you're up against and get the best advice available. We'll cross the money bridge when we have to. However, that'll be a lot easier if Cobbled Court Quilts is actually making a profit. And that's where Liza and I come in. Margot flipped to a new page in her notebook and laid it on the coffee table. Everyone leaned forward to watch as she drew a line to divide the page into 2 columns, labeling one projects and the other assigned to. She wrote my name next to the first 2 projects, information gathering and specialist appointments. All right, she said, looking up while still holding the pencil. Evelyn, you mentioned that you're way behind on checking your inventory and accounting. Yes, I've been so busy getting ready for today that I've really fallen behind. I don't know what's selling, what's lagging, or what needs to be reordered. And I still haven't settled my books from last month, so I don't know if I'm bankrupt or merely teetering on the edge of it. She smiled a little, joking even in the midst of her tragedy. In spite of her earlier meltdown, I admired her strength. She was tougher than I thought. Margot laughed, emitting a girlish giggle that was at odds, though pleasantly so, with her businesslike command of the situation. Well, that's probably information worth knowing. She wrote down inventory on her list. Liza, you and I are both between jobs, so we've got some time on our hands. You said that you'd worked in a music store in high school and helped with inventory. Would you like to take charge of that? Sure, I'm not doing anything. I can start tomorrow if you want. Tomorrow's Sunday, so let's wait till the next day. I think we could all use some rest, but I'll help you. Margot wrote her name next to and Liza's next to the task before going on. And Evelyn, I'm no accountant, but I'm pretty handy with a computer. I'm going to see about installing an accounting program that will update your inventory profits and losses at the point of sale. It'll save you a lot of time going forward. Also, do you have a website? Evelyn shook her head. No, I've thought about getting one, but I haven't had time. And besides, I really don't know where to begin. Margot nodded as she wrote down website and put her name next to it. I'll get you set up with one right away. We can just use a template for right now. It won't be fancy, but they aren't expensive, and at least give you a presence on the web. It's great PR. Come to think of it, she mused, I'm going to call the paper and see if we can't rework that story they ran about you, update the information, and see if we can get some other papers in the area to run it. Something like that could bring a lot of new business into the door. She quickly scribbled newspaper article onto her list and assigned herself this responsibility. So that just leaves one thing for the moment, and that's the day-to-day running of the shop. How long has it been since you had a day off, Evelyn? Evelyn laughed. A day off? What's that? I'm always here. Even when the shop is closed, I'm still working, trying to catch up on all the things I couldn't get to during the day. I'm planning on hiring some help, but I can't do that until the shop starts to show a profit. That's terrible, I exclaimed. You can't keep working at that kind of a pace. No wonder you're feeling so overwhelmed today. You must have been on the edge of exhaustion even before your doctor gave you the news. You're going to have to take it a little easier, especially once you begin whatever treatment your doctor recommends. You've got to get some help. She's right, Margot agreed. Fortunately, you've already got experienced help right in this room. Liza and I have both worked in retail. We can definitely give you a hand during business hours. But what about you, Abigail? Do you have any retail experience? Before I could say anything, Liza interrupted. Oh, I'll say she does, she said in a voice dripping with sarcasm. My aunt's whole life is about retail. Shoes, bags, jewelry, furniture, artwork, you name it, she's bought it. She turned toward me. The angry glare was back. And what about you, I asked. Shall we tell them about your experiences in some of New Bern's finer retail establishments? I looked at the other two women. She got hold of a cashmere sweater for a price you wouldn't believe. Really, it was a crime. I smiled sweetly at my niece. She stared at me with daggers in her eyes, but her mouth was shut. Mission accomplished. Well, that's it then. Margot clapped her hands in a let's wrap this up gesture. Evelyn, I think we've got you covered, at least for the immediate future, though we should get together soon to see about what kind of progress we're making and update our assignments. How about Friday night, right after closing? Would that work for everyone? I thought about my calendar. Yes, I was free Friday at 5. After all, it would only be this once. I'd show up, give my report on breast cancer and the best doctors to treat it, wish Evelyn Dixon well, and that would be that. I nodded along with the others. Great. Evelyn, I'll be here at 10 on Monday. If you need anything in the meantime, even just someone to talk to, here's my phone number. I just live a couple of blocks away. Margot scribbled a number on the notepad, handed it to Evelyn, and then got up from her chair. Tears welled in Evelyn's eyes as she took the notepad. For a moment, I was worried that she was going to fall apart again, and I'd never get to Pearl's party. But instead of breaking down, she smiled. I don't know how to thank all of you. I'm just so grateful. She sniffed and laughed through her tears. Thank you. But I still don't quite understand how all this is happening and why you're putting yourselves out so much for a stranger. That made two of us. It's like I said before, Margot replied, giving her a quick squeeze. God knew you needed us today. We're put on earth to help each other. That was chapter 12. I hope you're enjoying it. Shall we go on to chapter 13? What do you think, gang? Let's do it. Chapter 13, Abigail Burgess Wynn. By the time we were finished, I didn't have time to go home and change for the party. Liza went back home, and I walked in the opposite direction, to the Pearls' house on Elm Street. When I got there, Florence greeted me at the door. She said she'd been worried that something had happened to me and asked what had held me up, but didn't wait for an answer before turning around to the assembled guests, who seemed to be having a fine time without me, and calling out gaily, "Now the party can really start. Abigail's here." Someone took my coat. Someone else got me a drink. I worked my way into the living room and stood by the fireplace listening to Grace Kahn tell the story about the time we were playing tennis and she accidentally hit our ball into the upper branches of a nearby beach, dropping it right into an abandoned bird nest. And before you can say Jack Robinson, Abby drops her racket, shimmies up the tree, and plucks the ball out of the nest. Everyone in the room, the same group of people I've been socializing with for as long as I can remember, laughed uproariously, though they must have heard this story a dozen times. And then she shimmies right back down and beats me 40-15. The crowd of listeners, who'd had quite a bit to drink by that time, howled with laughter. I chuckled and excused myself, saying I needed to freshen my drink. No one seemed to notice that my glass was still full. Franklin stood near the bar, filling a glass with his customary mineral water and lime. "Finally," I said as I approached, "a sober party guest." "Oh," he said, "are you speaking to me? Last time I saw you, you weren't." "Don't be silly. I have to speak to you. You're my lawyer." "Yes, so you reminded me when we parted, right before you told me to mind my own business and butt out of your life." He took a sip of his drink, or words to that effect. He smiled, and I knew that all was forgiven. "Franklin, let me ask you something. Is everyone we know as dull as I think they are? Sometimes I feel like I've been to this party 50 times in my life." He raised his eyebrows, amused by my observation. "Well, it's a small town, Abigail, and your circle of acquaintances has always been a tight one." "Don't be silly. I know everyone." "No, you know everyone you think is worth knowing, and that is a short, very short and exclusive list. By the way, how was your little quilting bee? I don't know that I've ever seen you with a needle and thread in your hand. Checkbook and pen, yes, but—" I interrupted him before he could have any more fun at my expense. "Obviously, you've been talking to Liza again." "Really, Franklin, I don't know what you see in that girl." "So," he said, wisely refusing to engage in battle, "did you enjoy yourself?" "It was interesting." "Interesting, really? Well, that's something. A far more positive reaction than I'd have supposed you have. You must have found something appealing about it." I shrugged noncommittally and put my glass on the bar. "It's been a long day, Franklin. I'm going to tell Stephen happy birthday and go home." "Abigail, are you all right? You don't seem quite yourself tonight. You're introspective." "Don't do it, Abby. Introspection becomes habit forming." "I'm fine, just tired. I've got a lot on my mind." "See, what did I tell you?" When I failed to respond to his teasing, Franklin's normally merry eyes grew serious. "Is it Liza again? Do you want to talk about it? I know my advice wasn't especially well received last time, but if you ever want to talk, you know I'm always ready to listen." "Of course you are," I said lightly. "You lawyers are always ready to listen in billable quarter hours." "Abigail, you have me on retainer. Whether I listen to you or not, you still pay me just as if I did, so you might as well take advantage of what you've already shelled out good money for." He smiled. "Seriously, are you sure you're all right? Can I give you a lift home?" "It's kind of you to offer, but no, thank you. It's a nice night. The walk will do me good. Good night, Franklin." I leaned in and gave him a quick peck on the cheek. "Good night, Abigail." I had been telling the truth. There was a lot on my mind. Trying to sort out the events of the day was confusing and distracting. It was only after I left the party and began walking home in the crisp fall air, shuffling through the first spent leaves of the season, moving down the sidewalk from one tight circle of lamplight into the next, like an actor trying to find the spotlight, that I realized I'd actually agreed to let Steve and Pearl drop by the house and give me a, quote, insurance checkup. I must have been more distracted than even I had realized. I decided to call Franklin the next day and let him deal with it, though perhaps I should tell him to throw some sort of business Stephen's way. Perhaps a life insurance policy. I could name Liza as the beneficiary. After all, she was my only living relative. My only living relative. I stopped, standing still in the darkness, immobile and silent, suspended between one circle of light and the next. My only living relative. 2 years ago today, my sister died. I raised my hand to cover my mouth. Somewhere in the distance, an owl hooted, calling out to other owls, but none answered. Through the lattice of my open fingers, I whispered a name into the night. The house was dark when I came in. Liza turned off the lights before retiring. I hung up my coat, left my purse on the sideboard, and climbed the stairs to my bedroom, treading lightly on the creaky 5th step so as not to wake Liza. But as I crept down the dim hallway past the guest room door, I thought I heard a noise coming from inside. I leaned my ear close to the door and heard the sound of muffled crying. I raised my hand as if to knock on the door, but my arm froze in midair. I couldn't bring myself to do it. Instead, I leaned in, resting my cheek against the door, and whispered, "Liza?" There was no answer. I raised my voice a little. "Liza, are you all right?" Inside, the sound of crying abruptly ceased. I heard a shuffling noise, as if she were moving under the blankets, then nothing. I waited for a long moment, then walked up the hall to my room and got into bed, where I lay looking out the window, wondering if Liza had fallen asleep, listening to the sounds of owls hooting as they searched the darkness for others of their kind. My dear friends, I will see you again next week on Monday, and we'll continue. I told you when we started, I'm just having a struggling time right now. I'm sure some of you feel the same way. But then I remembered, well, it's not that the verse all made it better, but it's something I am thinking about today. So these are the verses that are on my mind today from the Epistle of James, chapter 1, verses 2 through 4. My brethren, count it all joy when you fall into various trials, knowing that the testing of your faith produces patience. But let patience have its perfect work, that you may be made perfect and complete, lacking in nothing. Well, something to think about if, like me, you are feeling a little out of patience. I hope you guys have a wonderful weekend. Again, maybe spend some time sewing masks if they're needed in your area. Check out that digital resource there for my friend Jackie Kunkel's tutorial and patterns. I will see you all Monday. God bless you, my friends.